President Trump claims there's a genocide underway in South Africa. That's a legal determination. The State Department would make it. Are you trying to determine that now?
I will determine that these people are having their properties taken from them. They can call it whatever they want, but these are people that on the basis of their race are having their properties taken away from them and their lives being threatened and in some cases killed. These are people that applied and made these claims in their applications and seek to come to the United States in search of refuge. We've often been lectured by people all over the place about how the United States needs to continue to be a beacon for those who are oppressed abroad. Well, here's an example where we're doing that. So I don't understand why people are criticizing it. I think people should be celebrating it, and I think people should be supporting it.
So lately, we've been kind of covering this topic of how America is bankrupting itself in order to subsidize poverty around the rest of the world. And it's been a wildly popular topic with you guys, so I figure we might as well continue that coverage. Because on one hand, recently we talked about Somalia and how 43 years of USAID economic development funding went absolutely nowhere. And now that USAID has been cut off and shut down, Somalia has essentially plunged into an economic crisis because those 4 decades of spending our money trying to help them went absolutely nowhere. And it's like, yeah, you wonder why we're $40 trillion in debt? It's because of this mentality. But even yesterday, we talked about that on a domestic level when it comes to immigration and the fact that there are insanely high ratios of refugees, illegal aliens, even legal immigrants who come to this country and instead of self-sustaining are actively living off of SNAP and other government benefits. It's a crazy and wild situation, and it interestingly kind of debunks the neoliberal worldview that you've been sold on 2 levels, right? On one hand, we say, oh, we need USAID because foreign aid actually helps with economic development and it gives us soft power around the world. And then you just notice that's not true. Or on the domestic level of immigration, right? They tell us we need immigrants because they're good for the economy and they contribute to our growth. And then we broke down the numbers yesterday of actually it's the opposite. Right? Immigration is actively destroying our economy because the people we are bringing over here are actually taking more from the system than they're putting in. And that is a 101 trip to bankruptcy. Well, in today's video, I want to bring you a news story on how Trump is essentially cutting off refugee resettlement into America. He is taking the prior Biden administration level caps for how many refugees America is going to take in per year to almost close to 0 and is now going to be prioritizing mainly white South Africans, right? The Boers, the Afrikaners, in who he's going to be taking in actually as a refugee. This is relevant because just yesterday, right, we're talking about the ratios of refugees who come to this country out of our gratitude and then live on food stamps and then like leech out of the system, right? Actively take money away from the taxpayer and all that stuff. Well, needless to say, as you could expect, the left is absolutely losing their minds over this. They're saying it is racist because, you know, we love refugees, we love immigrants. But wait, you mean to tell me that the migrants are now white, Christian, and politically right-wing? Close the borders, right? All of a sudden the leftists are like, no, we can't have this. Diversity is our strength, but except for white, right-wing people, you know, and that really does tell you so much about what you need to know. But yeah, this is a obviously very positive development for the United States, and we'll kind of tie that back to some of these economic themes we've been talking about as of late, because not only are you bringing in people who break the minds of the left, there seems to be strong evidence, right, that likely white South African farmers, primarily the type of people that are being brought in under this migration policy. Well, first of all, you know, they told us, oh, who's going to pick the grapes, right? When it comes to the illegal aliens, you know, who is going to be doing the farm labor? Americans don't want to do that. So why are you mad that we're importing farmers? Oh, you mean to tell me because the farmers are going to actually be working and contributing to the economy and not like sucking welfare actually and tax dollars out of the economy instead of into it? So nonetheless, we'll get into this full story here today. Again, Trump basically cutting off refugee resettlement, except for the South Africans. It's quite hilarious. But first, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, you can see this is the presidential memorandum right here. citing Section 207 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. But to make a very long story short, he is using executive power to shrink the refugee cap of refugees America will take in from 125,000 to only 7,500. So basically comparing the 2024 level to the 2025 level. So under the Biden administration, we're taking in over 100,000 refugees per year. Now under Trump, it's very close to net zero, right? Only about 7K. Now, before we get into the whole South African debate, because again, that's who's now going to be prioritized for refugee status, I would first like to talk about the raw numbers, because this is something we've been trying to bring up a lot, which is the levels of migration into this country. For the past several decades, by the way, both legal and illegal, but you add it all up, are simply unsustainable for like any major country to be able to handle. Why do we say that? Well, as one example, right? So under Biden, we're letting in well over 100,000 refugees into the United States every single year. And it's like, doesn't that seem like a lot of people time and time again? Like, you're never going to stop just every year 100,000 new refugees? What do you expect to happen? Do you think that's going to be a good or a bad thing for social stability? But keep in mind, it's not just 100,000 refugees. We're talking about a million or so people every single year, every single decade since the 1960s, right? Through the legal immigration system. And then, of course, under Biden, it's not just 100,000 refugees, it's millions upon millions, nobody knows how, of quote unquote asylum seekers, aka illegal aliens, that poured through the southern border. And I ask it a question like this: how is this sustainable for any country? You know? And some people will say, oh, but America's always had immigrants. Yeah, we're not even saying no immigrants or refugees, right? It's literally 7,500. We're cutting it down, but you know, if you want to make an analogy, for instance, to Ellis Island, back then even, the levels of migration brought into you have an existing society. You can only sustain so many new people coming in at once before that society basically collapses or becomes a different society, right? And under Ellis Island even, in the early 1900s, by the way, history lesson here if anyone's curious, you know, American society was actually deeply unstable. We were having social problems because of all of that, right? Anarchists were assassinating the president basically every single year. You had gang wars between race wars, all this stuff breaking out in New York City. But basically, in the 1920s, America actually passed the 1924 Immigration Act that said, well, we've let in a lot of people. For the next several decades, we're going to restrict immigration so that way this can all cool off. There can be a process of integration and all that. And yet nowadays, if you say, okay, so like millions of people have come into this country. And as you can see, there's sort of a breakdown, and there has been for years, of social stability. Maybe we should cap the levels. Of course, then they say that's racist. They say that's xenophobic. They say, America's never done that. America's always had immigrants. Oh, but actually in American history, America has done that, as should any sane country, because again, I don't know, maybe like 10 million people in the span of 4 years, which Biden did, right, through all forms of immigration, legal, illegal, temporary, permanent, refugee, non-refugee, have been like this. And that's, by the way, a point J.D. Vance raised last night, if you missed that.
So here's the thing. I can believe that the United States should lower its levels of immigration in the future, while also respecting that there are people who have come here through lawful immigration pathways that have contributed to the country. But just because one person or 10 people or 100 people came in legally and contributed to the United States of America, does that mean that we're thereby committed to let in 1 million or 10 million or 100 million people a year in the future? No, that's not right. We cannot have, I'll go and finish. We cannot have an immigration policy where what was good for the country 50 or 60 years ago binds the country inevitably for the future. There's too many people who want to come to the United States of America, and my job as vice president is not to look out for the interests of the whole world. It's to look out for the people of the United States. Now,
and of course they'll say, well, America should take in asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants and all this stuff because, you know, that's our compassion. Some people are fleeing poverty. Some people want to be part of the American dream or experiment or something like that. And it's like, okay, I get it. At what point, though, do we say we can only have so much compassion? You understand? At what point, because now it's like tens and tens of millions of people, literally, do we say, okay, I think we've done enough charity for people all around the world. Now we need to take care of ourselves, right? It would be like, for instance, you're doing like a food drive for the homeless, and because you're just a philanthropist and you're saying, okay, you get something, but then imagine the entire homeless population in the United States shows up and then they're all demanding something. It's like, literally, I don't have enough to give all you guys. You understand that? So that's my whole thing with this, and why, this is just obviously such great policy. Just in the raw numbers, they need to be reduced. But of course, that's only component number one, is he's basically cutting off the majority of refugee resettlement. Secondly, here is that most slots, as you can see, are going to the Afrikaners in South Africa who have faced things like, brutal murders, farm attacks on the basis, by the way, simply that they are white, as many people know. There have been constant calls within local politics for ethnic cleansing and genocide. Some would argue those things are, of course, already happening. And, this is what you're seeing. So now the result of that's going to be the refugees no longer will necessarily be those from Somalia or Afghanistan or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's apparently now going to be people like this. And I asked the question, right? Why do you think the left is so upset?
Group of white South Africans to the United States via its refugee program as soon as next week. 3 people familiar with the matter have said. It's a divisive move.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
Especially given that Trump has been blocking refugee admissions from the rest of the world.
It was like an answered prayer.
Life coach Katia Beeden is administrator of a website that seeks to help white South Africans take up Trump's offer.
We've been forgotten. It's very hard for us to travel. It's very hard for us to get visas. So to suddenly hear that a country like the United States is offering us refugee status was a really big deal. And I was so excited. I felt so relieved. It just felt like a lifeline.
In February, Trump issued an executive order that called for the US to resettle Afrikaner refugees. It said Afrikaners, who are descendants of mostly Dutch early settlers, were victims of unjust racial discrimination.
Well, leftists, what's the problem with this? I thought refugees are a good thing. I thought we love immigrants. I thought that diversity is our strength, right? So surely you should be happy, right? The Trump administration's letting in refugees. Oh, but they're not. I wonder why. Why could that be the case? Well, let's take the reaction, for instance, of progressive commentators like Mehdi Hasan. Keep in mind, Mehdi is a guy who immigrated to America only like something a decade ago or whatever, right? He's from the UK, but his family is Pakistani. And basically has spent his entire life in the United States calling everyone else Islamophobes, right? He willingly came to this country and then says that the society is Islamophobic and is always like crying and complaining about it, and then constantly just insulting America. And, I asked the guy the question on X, by the way, like, why are you here if you hate it so much? And then he got really mad. But anyways, here's his response saying that, in response again to actually bringing in refugees, and by the way, bringing diversity, because the vast majority of refugees forever in America have been non-white. So, hey, you got to fill the diversity quota. Aren't white people included in diversity, Mehdi Hasan, right? No, his response is, of course, difficult to see how anyone can describe this thing as anything other than ... racist. So it's racist to bring in immigrants if they are white. But again, I thought immigrants were good. I thought refugees were good, etc., etc. Well, when you break it down, it's really mask off and the whole situation, right, becomes extremely obvious. Their problem is that these small number, again, of South African refugees are actually going to do the things they lie to us and claim our current immigration system is doing, but it is not, right? For example, the melting pot, quote unquote, assimilating and integrating into American society. Well, after all, they speak English, right? The culture is fundamentally a Western one. It is going to be pretty straightforward for them, as you can tell. And they're already patriotic and they already love America, right? And it's just the truth. Marco Rubio brought that up, by the way, at the time, right? It's going to be much easier to integrate these people into society than someone from a totally alien, like non-Western, non-English speaking culture. That's common sense. But of course, they actually have a problem with that, because their entire goal, and they know what they're doing. Like, we shouldn't be pretending like leftists are just naive. I think in many ways they're just actually evil, because the entire goal of people like Mehdi Hasan is, yes, import a bunch of non-Westerners so that they basically are coming in such high numbers, they take over. They don't want them to integrate or assimilate into American society because they actively want to destabilize American society. Fundamentally, at their core, these people are Marxists. They want to see the West fall so that way they can have their little, proletariat rising up moment or revolution. And how better to do that, how to destabilize the West, other than say, okay, let's put together a bunch of people who share nothing in common and see what happens. They know exactly what's going to happen. That's why, again, they're mad, first of all, right? That the migrants here are actually, fulfilling that. Of course, when it comes to diversity, right? We know that's a dog whistle. They just mean anything excluding white people. So they're mad about that. And of course, lastly, it's no secret. The entire point of their immigration policy for the past several decades has been, yes, to import an entirely brand new voter base in here. So when the immigrants coming over are right wing, suddenly they're xenophobic, right? Suddenly they want to close the borders. Oh, and one more point I'd like to make. This is something we should also not forget. Again, going back to that argument of we need them for the economy. No, actually, you need them for the economy because you are actively, again, trying to bankrupt the country and explode the national debt essentially by bringing in a bunch of people who are, again, taking more from the system than they're giving. Well, when you have these South Africans who, according to you, are probably going to do like actual farm work and be good at it and not just like living off of SNAP benefits, that's also, again, further a problem because those people are not going to vote Democrat and they're not going to destabilize the West. It's just so hilarious, too, when we consider the raw numbers here, right? Again, keep in mind, it's like 100,000 plus refugees. Trump says 7,000 white refugees. That's racist. This is the worst thing ever. He supports apartheid. He supports ethnic genocide. He's this, he's that. It's 7,000 people, right? But of course, when they had a system that's bringing in like literally millions of non-white people over the decades, that's perfectly fine. But like this tiny droplet of like increasing the white population in America, no, you can't do that. Why? Because this, again, messes with, I guess, what you could call their master plan. And I thought that was so telling when, of course, just a couple months ago, you might remember the Trump administration imported about 49, actually it was exactly 49 white South Afrikaners. And again, hundreds of thousands of refugees from non-white places. The moment you bring in 49 white people, they absolutely lost their freaking mind.
Sure.
Recognize the fact that you are defending race-based discrimination. You are defending race-based violence.
I'm not defending race-based discrimination in any way. The president uses the term genocide. There is no genocide in South Africa. And frankly, it does a disservice to people in countries around the world who are facing genocide. In the Congo, in Sudan, those who faced it in Rwanda and Bosnia and Cambodia. So when the president says that there's genocide in South Africa, it does not exist. We should probably just start with that truth.
Okay, if you're going to allow me on your program, I'd like to speak.
You're welcome to.
we have granted asylum to 8,666 individuals since January 20th, regardless of color or creed. It is quite frankly disturbing to me that members of the media, including people who are on this very network, are trying to whitewash the facts and whitewash the fact that these individuals have faced discrimination, racial violence, the seizure of their land based on nothing but their skin color alone. This is the United States of America, a land of opportunity, and we will help those who are facing persecution from the government of South Africa.
So you clearly are not going to acknowledge there's no genocide in South Africa.
Right. Well, hopefully the left wing and globalist social agenda with what they're trying to do with migration, if it wasn't clear before, I hope it is now. The very transparent mask off way they act when you bring in immigrants and refugees that don't, let's say, meet a certain criteria for what they're looking for. Okay. I want to bring you a little piece of information that's actually very interesting, going back to what we talked about earlier in terms of the unsustainable level, first of all, of refugee resettlement that America was engaged in before. And then secondly, right, the places these people are coming from and how fundamentally different these people are from, people currently living in America, for instance. Here's a good reporting out of Twin Falls, Idaho. You might think to yourself, Idaho, right? That's the last place that you would expect to hear about refugee resettlement. But if you actually know anything deeply about this issue, no, that's the number one place most affected, right? Is typically like these small towns, predominantly white, predominantly in Republican states. And it's like, why are you suddenly resettling all the refugees there? In Idaho, it was a big thing in West Virginia, if you might remember, under the Obama administration. And it's like, yeah, maybe because there's a reason why they're targeting those states and those places and those people and trying to terraform and change those places with, again, unsustainable levels of migration, you know, and further why they're melting down because their little sort of system, their approach to this has been taken apart by the Trump administration. So let's read for you. Twin Falls, a city of about 55,000 people in southern Idaho, only 55,000, very small place, right? Had been receiving hundreds of refugees annually until Mr. Trump paused the program. So, thank you, Mr. Trump. The refugee families had fled there from countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Eritrea, and Sudan, and many had waited years for approval to travel to the United States, living precariously in camps or urban centers. And look, this might get me in trouble, but when it comes to integration and assimilation, we cannot honestly pretend as if all places around the world are the same. It's just the truth, right? Individually, you can probably pick out someone from any country who would come to America and fit right in. But on a macro level, you're talking about thousands of people. I mean, let's just be completely honest with ourselves, right? Someone who, for instance, comes to America from Canada or the UK, or even, you know, the Boers in South Africa is just another example, Australia, where they speak English, where they have a very similar culture to us, very similar heritage even, by the way, you know, all part of like the historic Anglosphere, right? Is going to have a much easier time integrating into American society than, say, someone from Somalia or the Congo or Myanmar or something like that. I mean, it's just the truth, right? Oh, it's racist to say. It's like, no, literally, I mean, first and foremost, there's language. And then there's culture and there's the way we live. And like, yeah, there are countries more similar to America and also more different than America. And interestingly, right, it's always from the random faraway places that are the most alien cultures to us, like Somalia and Afghanistan and the Congo, that the Democrats, for whatever reason, are always demanding, no, the people need to be coming from here. And it's like, again, what agenda can that be besides destabilizing American society? That's, of course, the point. So that's why I say on one hand, yeah, although I do think that America should reduce its overall migration levels, I also love what Trump is doing with this, right? Not only is he bringing the overall number down, which we need, but I also think of the people we take into this country. Can we just be honest with ourselves? If the left is going to import their voter base, then I don't see why we shouldn't do the same, right? I think we should have priority, not just for the Afrikaners and the Boers. But hey, what about in the UK? Right? All the patriots over there who are tired of living in an authoritarian country. They're tired of being arrested for free speech or attacked by criminals constantly and all this stuff. Okay. You want to chase freedom, buddy? You want asylum? You want refugee? You want citizenship? You know, I'd be happy to give welcome to America, buddy, right? You know, we should do that. Same for the patriots in Canada and Australia and parts of the European Union. You know, everyone's tired of the same thing. Like, again, if they tried to terraform America into this permanent left-wing majority using immigration, why don't we do that with our immigration? Like, I actually think this is a fantastic idea. Because you listen to someone like this right here, right? And you mean to tell me you don't think they would easily fit in American society and actually make this country better?
Oh, I live in the borough right next to Hillingdon.
Yep.
And I moved into my house in 2019. My local shop, there's been 3 stabbings, 1 murder since then.
Wow.
My friend was murdered last year up on the high street. Girl I know was murdered in Southall Park. The government are failing us. I'm so scared for my children. I have a 22-year-old son, and I'm begging him to move out of the country.
Oh my goodness, I feel for you.
What are these politicians doing to us? They're putting our children in so much danger. They're putting everyone in danger, and they're not doing nothing to help us.
And that's the thing. A lot of us feel that you know, how many is too many?
They're pushing us to do something that we don't want to do. We are peaceful people. British people never vote against their government.
Yeah.
They're going to push us through it because they're not listening to us. Our friends, our family are dying.
Yeah, so first of all, you always hear Democrats talk about, oh, well, these people are fleeing danger or persecution, right? And according to them, by the way, this is the justification they used under the whole Biden administration. If you live in the same neighborhood as a Latin American drug cartel, which is like most people who live in Latin America, you all deserve asylum because you're fleeing for your safety. Okay, so why can't they flee for their safety? You know? Give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor. Why is this person not tired and poor? Actually, she is. 100%. But they don't want her here for a certain reason. I wonder why that could be. I'll tell you this, though. I want her here, right? That is the first person I would line up to say, like, yeah, when it comes to this whole idea of America, like, oh, we're a nation of immigrants, we let in people from the rest. That's the person I want to be American, actually. That's the person where, like, I think the citizens of this country should say, no, you're welcome into this family, actually. Like, you belong with us, not, freaking people living off of SNAP or a bunch of criminals, right? How about that, you know? We should do this. I'm so serious about it, right? And, there could be the debate over, well, should people in Britain or the EU or Canada, for instance, maybe they should stay and fight for those places or maybe not. And so it's a choice, right? I'm not, if they want to stay there and say, this is my home, I'm going to defend it, I think that's honorable too. But why should we not offer them that option, actually, right? You bring them over, how do you think they're going to vote if they got over here, if you want to be cynical about it? But also, again, on a bigger picture, even politics aside, that person would contribute way more to American society and would integrate way easier into American society than the refugees the Democrats are brought over here, right? Just some food for thought, I would say. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thought about this. Yeah, like all the people living under authoritarian occupation in the West come to America, right? Like we want these people. I want this person here. And again, that's not to say that we should bring all these people in at the expense of the native and existing population, right? But you see the numbers, it's way smaller numbers anyway. So yes, of the people we do pick, we should be picking people right like this right here. And I think that to me seems like common sense. But again, we know why it offends the left so much when you say that. But anyways, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.